Good afternoon, everyone. I am Zen Honeycutt. This is the new MDs, mothers, doctors, and scientists working together to heal our children. I'm so excited to have this show with Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Michelle Perro. Welcome, ladies.
Great to be here.
Stephanie.
And for those of you who don't know, Dr. Stephanie Seneff is an MIT senior scientist, and she is an expert on glyphosate. And she has a book out called Toxic Legacy: How the Weed Killer Glyphosate is Destroying Our Health and the Environment. It's a fantastic book, and we are so honored to have her be a part of this very special show, and which is a series. We've now been doing this for over a year now, haven't we?
We have.
Over a year, yes. And Dr. Michelle Perro spearheaded this whole endeavor. She is the head of gmoscience.org, and she is the author of What's Making Our Children Sick: How Industrial Foods Are Causing the Epidemic of Chronic Illness and What Parents and Doctors Can Do About It. And she has a new book coming out called Making Our Children Well. And when is that expected to come out, Dr. Perro?
Next year, it looks like. Inner Traditions Publishing, and working on it literally as we speak.
That's wonderful. Excellent. Well, today's show is one that is very important to people with not only gluten intolerance or people who want to lose weight. There are a lot of reasons why people eat gluten-free food, and we're going to be talking about gluten-free food test results, but also this is so important for people with celiacs, because people with celiacs, when exposed to gluten, it can be life-threatening. So we take today's results very seriously, what we're going to be talking about, and we hope that you will review the results yourself, talk about it with your doctor if needed. And again, what we are about to share here on the show is not medical advice. This is information, educational information for you to research with your doctors. And we hope that you will do that. All right, so we have on the show, we are going to be talking about the glyphosate results, pesticide results, minerals, and also gluten results for the testing that we did on 46 samples on gluten-free test results, which we chose based on a Moms Across America survey. So if you are interested in being a part of more testing, please join momsacrossamerica.org, sign up for our newsletter, and you will be notified for things like surveys on when we select foods, which type of foods that we would like to get tested. Now, why test gluten-free food? I'm going to share a personal story first, and then each of the ladies here have some insights. It's so exciting. If you've ever wanted to have a scientist and a doctor to help you sort out what's going on with the food supply or your health, this is your opportunity. So please share this with your friends and family and other people, and they can ask questions on the show. We'll be reading your comments and answering questions as we go along. So for me personally, and besides the fact that I went gluten-free years ago, as much as possible, sometimes I do eat gluten now and then, but when I went gluten-free, I lost 16 pounds in 6 weeks with no exercise. But that was not the reason why I went gluten-free. I went gluten-free because I was tired, and I was told that I had an intolerance to gliadin, which is the modern protein in modern wheat. It's a protein in modern wheat. It's a hybridized type of wheat. I was fine with ancient wheat, like heirloom grains like spelt and corazon and kamut and Ezekiel and those types of things. But anyway, I went gluten-free. I really fought it. I love croissants and pizza and all of that. And it was really difficult and continues to be very difficult. But I have a dear friend. The real reason why we tested is because I have a dear friend whose husband has celiac, and like a crumb will bother him. So they don't eat wheat at all. They don't bring it into the house ever. And she has to eat gluten-free all the time. And she also eats organic produce, organic dairy, all of that. But she told me recently that she has gut dysbiosis and anxiety. It's almost crippling anxiety. And she never had those things before. And she's like, I've been eating gluten-free and, organic for almost 10 years now. What is going on? And I said, I'm sorry, but I think that the gluten-free food might still have glyphosate in it, because as Stephanie will explain, as described in her book, glyphosate can be sprayed on crops such as corn and soy and peas and lentils and beans that are some of the main ingredients in gluten-free food. And if the gluten-free food is not organic, it could have high levels of glyphosate. So in attempts to support our moms and many other people who have also said similar things, that they have gut issues, anxiety, mental health issues, and yet they've been eating gluten-free and mostly organic for a very long time. We want to support health and create healthy communities by discovering whether or not that theory was true, right? Whether or not gluten-free foods had glyphosate in them. And also we wanted to check for pesticides because a lot of farmers are switching from glyphosate to other types of pesticides to use either as a drying agent or as weed killers. And of course, many of these other pesticides are banned in Europe, right? Banned in other countries, but we use them here. And so we are going to be sharing the information about that as well. We also tested for minerals and we tested for gluten, and we have some disturbing results on that. So that's my personal story, however, like why we tested. And we want to do a shout out to Centner Academy, who is the main supporter of this testing. Of course, all of our Moms Across America supporters that donated are supporting this type of testing. It is not cheap, and it's challenging to do. So we really appreciate when you can donate, especially monthly, really helps us to continue the work that we do. So thank you to Alila and David Centner of Centner Academy in Miami, Florida. They have an amazing school that feeds organic and local food to the kids. They have filtered water. They have an EMF-free environment. It's an amazing school. So shout out to them. Thank you so much. All right, so we have, I'll go through the report in a little bit, but first, can we start off with why test for glyphosate? Stephanie, why is glyphosate, why would that be a big deal that it's in their food supply? I mean, the EPA allows it. We've been using it for 40, practically 50 years. Monsanto / Bayer says it's safe. Why is it newsworthy that glyphosate is actually in our food supply?
Yeah, that's a good question. And of course, people have become so comfortable with glyphosate that it kind of makes it hard for them to imagine that it could be toxic, I believe, at this point. When you have Roundup that you can put on your dandelions in your yard and you don't have to use any safety equipment, you think it's safe. And you also trust your government to, when they say it's safe, that should be true. And unfortunately, the government is not doing their job. And I've looked extensively at the problem, as you know, with my book. I spent 10 years studying glyphosate before I wrote that book, extensive references. And it's becoming clearer and clearer in recent times. I'm so delighted to see the number of new papers that are coming out left and right. I can't even keep up with them anymore.
How many would you estimate are out now of papers or studies on glyphosate and its impact on health?
It's hard to say, but at least toxic effects of glyphosate, gosh, it's probably over 100, I would guess. I have collected a large number of papers myself. Okay. And they're coming out very recently. In fact, maybe this might be the time for Anne to put up that slide that we've prepared on this new paper that's actually October 2024. So this is not even really out yet, but it is out. They're just calling it October 2024. Glyphosate is a direct or indirect activator of pro-inflammatory signaling and cognitive impairment. And this is a review paper, and it goes through all the studies that have been done to show that glyphosate is disrupting the gut microbiome, and that's affecting a leaky gut, which is causing the release of LPS is liposaccharides that are produced by these toxic metabolites of these pathogens that are overgrowing in the gut because glyphosate's killing off the good guys. And so then those make their way to the brain and cause pro-inflammatory cascades that can lead to cognitive impairment. So I think this is really central to what's going on with autism. And I'm very delighted to see this paper coming out. And there have been other papers recently as well hitting at this idea of messing up the gut microbiome and then causing foggy brain, all these kinds of brain fog, all these issues that people are finding. And of course, the kids with the autism especially, but also the ADHD. And as you mentioned, the anxiety. I think all of these things are coming out of our consequence of chronic poisoning with glyphosate. And it is all over our food supply, as you're finding.
Yeah. And Stephanie, years ago, I heard from Dr. Matthew Buckley, who said that glyphosate impacts the gut microbiome, which it looks like that study is talking about. And it offsets the gut microbiome by killing off the beneficial gut bacteria and allowing for the proliferation of the pathogenic gut bacteria. And on the outer walls of the pathogenic gut bacteria, something called lipopolysaccharides, I just saw mentioned in that study. And the lipopolysaccharides correct me if I'm wrong, but their job is to tell the vagus nerve in the gut that there's to go up the vagus nerve and to tell the microglia cells in the brain that there's bad guys in the gut. So then the brain goes,
exactly. That's a really great way to say it.
right, attack, and then the attack means it's creating an excitotoxin, and the excitotoxin then causes inflammation in the brain, and like that brain neuron can die out. And then that's why he asserted, I don't know if this study is actually proving or not, but perhaps kids that used to be able to make eye contact suddenly don't make eye contact, or they start having tics or stammers because the brain neurons are not connecting the way that they would before. Is that kind of what
That's
this
beautiful. That's very well said. It's much more accessible than the way I say it. So that's fantastic.
Okay, well, we need both ways because
Yeah.
we need to be able to fully understand this, and that's why we have the show, because we want to make sure that we are communicating what the science is saying, and not everybody can understand what's going on with the science. So we appreciate that. So that you're confirming that, then that's basically what's happening.
Very well said. Yes.
Okay. All right. That's very disturbing because there are millions of kids now. I don't know how many with autism. What's Dr. Pero, what are the numbers now of kids with autism?
Oh dear. For the past 20 years, about, I would say 40 years ago it was 1 in 10,000. And now it varies state by state, country by country. But here in California, it's about 1 in 20. New Jersey, I read reports of 1 in 13. When I wrote the book, which is only about 6 years ago now, it was 1 in 54. That number's radically changed. So it is clear that we are in a global pandemic of autistic spectrum disorder. That is a true pandemic.
Right. So we'll get into more about how glyphosate impacts our children. I want to first share the glyphosate report, and let's see, glyphosate test results. Okay.
And you have to share your screen, Zen.
Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so the glyphosate test results report is found on momsacrossamerica.org. We just put it out, I believe, last week, and we tested 46 samples of gluten-free foods, including bread, pasta, crackers, snacks, flour, dessert mixes, and chips for glyphosate/AMPA. AMPA, just for anybody who doesn't know, is the breakdown of glyphosate. And it is actually even more toxic. So when we did the report, you see a combined result of glyphosate and AMPA. We also tested for 236 other pesticides. We have to do them separately, report on them separately, because glyphosate needs its own test. It's a sneaky little bugger that gets into cells, and it has to have a very special test. So we always have to test for glyphosate separately, and that's what makes this testing so expensive. We also tested for minerals and for gluten. And again, these results affect over 20 million people in America. 12% of men and 9% of women report eating gluten-free. Over 660 million people around the world avoid gluten. And that's just the people who know that they should. There are a lot more people who don't realize that their crankiness, irritability, and marriage being on the rocks could be possibly because they're eating muffins in the morning, and don't realize how much it impacts their personality and their behavior. Celiac disease is a serious life-threatening condition, and the people who have that must avoid gluten entirely. And they also have an increased risk of coronary artery disease, small bowel cancer. And I just learned from Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Michelle Perro that they have an increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So we'll talk more about the health risks. So the results are that 44 out of 46% of the samples came back positive for glyphosate. And if you could show that image just of the test results right now so that people can see what that looks like. And Mary, yes, this is in our food, you're asking. And glyphosate is not Agent Orange. That is a separate chemical. Iwashare is I don't know how to pronounce your name. But so this is the lab, Health Research Institute, that did our testing. And they are an accredited lab, and they've been testing for glyphosate for many years now. I forgot how many, it's probably close to 10. And you can see from this lab report, glyphosate and AMPA and the effective level of glyphosate, that all but 2 have detectable levels. There's one that has trace levels. So the not detectable levels was Edwards and Sons crackers. And if you could show that image, and then also lesser evil popcorn were the only two that didn't, we have an image of that, were the only two that were not positive for glyphosate. So we want to first and foremost thank Edwards and Sons, which is my favorite crackers, one of the only crackers I buy, and Lesser Evil popcorn, which is delicious, for sourcing clean, clean, products of that are not, that don't have glyphosate. And we
The
want to say,
popcorn is organic, right?
yes, they're both organic, actually.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
Only two out of 46. And we did test, I believe it was 3 or 4 other organic products, and they did have trace levels or very low levels of glyphosate. So that's a problem. We were very disturbed by that, because we thought if we bought organic and gluten-free, that for sure there would be no glyphosate in it. But there are, many different types of organic foods that have been found to be contaminated with glyphosate at low levels. It's always better to buy organic, but very unfortunately, some organic has been shown to be contaminated, and that's why it's so important to detox on a regular basis. And we'll talk about what you can do. I know there's another question from our listeners about chlorine dioxide to break down glyphosate in our system. Michelle, we'll talk about all the ways we can detox towards the end. So I appreciate you hanging in there with us. We want to not lose our mom brain patterns that we anyway, our plan for the show. We'll get to the detoxing at the end. So that is the testing that I wanted to show. I actually want to show the highest levels and the lowest levels. I'm sorry, folks. I'm managing showing some things here, so it just takes me a second to share the screen. And let's see. Okay, so we want to show 44 out of 46 of the samples came back positive for glyphosate, and out of the total 237, the other 236 pesticides we test for, glyphosate was the most prevalent. However, not all of the gluten-free products that were also organic were the lowest in glyphosate. Some, did have levels that were concerning. 21% of the samples were positive for glyphosate at levels higher than 10 parts per billion, and that's the EU threshold for acceptable glyphosate residues. And according to Dr. Don Huber, he's a plant pathologist of 60 years, exposure to 0.1 parts per billion of glyphosate is harmful and should be avoided. And unfortunately, 95.6% of the samples contained higher than 0.1 parts per billion of glyphosate. And the highest level of glyphosate was in the Banza cavatappi pasta. And this was the highest level of glyphosate ever found by the lab that we test with in human foods. So this was very disturbing. And what's even more disturbing is that before this testing was released, Banza stated in an email to one of our board members that we work very closely with our suppliers to monitor for glyphosate. And that's why when we originally tested this, we listed this product as a low glyphosate product. We expected to find low levels. And then when we found the highest levels, we were shocked. So can you tell us, maybe, Stephanie and Dr. Perel, maybe both of you, what is 2,876.41 parts per billion of glyphosate going to do to the human body? Maybe Stephanie, can you explain functionally what could happen there? And then Michelle, can you tell us what type of symptoms we might have? Mm-hmm. What is that going to do to the body?
Well, I mean, chronic glyphosate exposure is what's the big problem. And we're just getting it all the time in our food every day, also in the air and in the water that we drink. We're just being chronically exposed. And glyphosate is really messing up the gut microbiome. And it's very, very interesting to me. Actually, it gets back to the obesity thing, because where you said, Glenn, you went off of gluten and then you lost weight. And that's really quite interesting, because glyphosate kills off the bacteria that ultimately produce the food that's manna from heaven for the colonocytes. The colonocytes love butyrate. It's their favorite food. And the gut microbes are responsible for making butyrate to supply to the colonocytes. That's the cells, human cells lining the colon. And when they don't get enough butyrate, they get unhappy. And then you get all these issues with the gut that we're seeing, inflammatory gut, ultimately cancer of the gut. I mean, all cancer, colon cancer, these kinds of things. So what's happening is that glyphosate is messing up the two very important, the most important bacteria in the infant gut are the lactobacillus and the bifidobacteria. And both of them are very sensitive to glyphosate. So they are being killed off. And both of them have serious responsibility for keeping the gut healthy. And in terms of the bifidobacteria, they're the ones that start the whole system that finally makes the butyrate. And they do that by digesting fiber. And in fact, milk contains these complex sugar compounds, the milk liposaccharides. Milk, or what is it called?
Human milk oligosaccharides.
Oligosaccharides. Sorry, I lost that word. Milk oligosaccharides, which are very complicated sugar, starch-like things. But they have starches like that too, complicated sugar chains that the bifidos are very good at breaking down into small molecules that can then get turned into butyrate by other microbes. And that whole system breaks down when glyphosate wrecks the bifidos. And the other problem is the lactobacillus, and they actually are very responsible for breaking down gluten and casein. Both of those proteins are interesting because they have high levels of proline. And proline is a unique amino acid that requires special enzymes to break it down. And the lactobacillus provide those enzymes for the host.
So could kids be having dairy allergies right now because they're eating glyphosate on wheat?
Absolutely.
Oh
Absolutely.
my gosh, no. This is why possibly so many people have dairy intolerances right now, because they're eating glyphosate on wheat.
Well,
Absolutely.
right. The glyphosate is causing a gut disturbance called leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So once the gut becomes leaky, not only does the gluten cross over into prematurely before it's fully digested as in these long amino acid sequences, they're not completely broken down, but other foods before they're completely broken down also cross from this impaired it should be a border that is monitored by little proteins called zonulin. So then the immune system sees these incompletely broken down proteins as foreign invaders. It mounts an immune response. And when this is happening with every meal over and over again, every day, 365 days a year, you develop something called chronic inflammation. So when you test kids for food sensitivities, grown-ups, you'll see they're intolerant to the foods they eat. Gluten, dairy, the foods commonly eaten by most of us, especially takeout, soy, corn.
Eggs.
And it's rare that you're going to find a kiwi or a zucchini sensitivity. It's usually the foods that we tend to eat a lot of: gluten, dairy, soy, corn.
Yeah, and eggs. And eggs too. Yeah.
And eggs. Thank you.
Yeah. So, yes, so this can very well cause stomach issues and allergy symptoms. Yes. And coincidentally, this is how I found out about it too, was Robin O'Brien's TED Talk, Patriotism on a Plate. She talks about how her child blew up, face expanded at breakfast time after eating Lego My Eggos waffles and blueberry yogurt, and so there you go, wheat and dairy right there. Both, and by the way, dairy has also been tested and found to be positive for glyphosate. So thanks Monsanto for ruining pizza for us, right? And waffles and yogurt. Monsanto claims to be feeding the world, or bear now, but they're actually making eating almost impossible for a lot of people, especially if you want to just eat food, that's off the grocery store shelves or restaurants or whatever. Like for a lot of people now, it's very, very difficult to just eat out at a restaurant or to eat whatever they want in a grocery store. And so we feel your pain, folks. Okay. We don't like giving this bad news about gluten and gluten-free food or any types of foods, but we do need to share this. And here's a graphic I want everybody to see about how the incidence between celiacs incidence and glyphosate on wheat has really exponentially and been correlated. This is from Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Nancy Swanson, right? You worked together on this.
Yes.
Okay, and it looks like Samcell too. So
that's right. Yes, as Anthony and I published the paper that was on gluten intolerance and linking it to glyphosate. There's a whole paper on that, and this is in that paper. And Nancy helped me get the data for this. She and I did that together.
Yeah. And wasn't that in 2012, Stephanie? We're talking about 13 years ago, 12 years.
I know our data they all stop at that point, and partly that things got messy after that with respect to the data because they changed the whole system we have a lot of data on hospital discharge, and they completely changed the system, cut way back on the number of hospitals, and and the data wasn't coming out. I mean, it became very difficult to push beyond that date, actually, because there was not adequate data from the government.
Yeah, the government has been really restricting our access to this data. And recently, when I went to a Counter WHO conference to the World Health Organization, setting the international health regulations, which would basically govern the whole world if there's a pandemic, people were walking around and we were brainstorming and talking, scientists, doctors, and lawyers from around the world. And it became apparent to me that governments around the world, like Germany, for instance, you can no longer find any information on side effects from the VARS, the COVID vaccine, no information at all. And what I believe is that there should be no policy without transparency. Governments should be completely transparent about what's going on. So if we cannot find the levels of glyphosate that are sprayed on our food supply, and we cannot find celiac incidents or cancer incidents or rise in autism, if we cannot get access to data about this, there should be no policies that are made by our government which mandate anything, right? Or require us to eat foods that's sprayed with these chemicals. They should have an obligation to be transparent. It's sort of like taxation without representation, right? So yeah, a little sidebar there, but that's something that is extremely important, is to have transparency on what's going on. And thanks for that, Michelle. This is an old slide. All right, so we talked about the lowest levels of glyphosate already in the gluten-free foods. The 44 out of 46 samples were positive. You can find the link to the glyphosate results on our website. We do need to mention that 2,4-D was the second most prevalent pesticide. This is the one that is in Agent Orange. One of our very smart viewers mentioned Agent Orange recently. Stephanie, what is the problem with having 2,4-D in our food?
I haven't studied 2,4-D extensively, but I know that Agent Orange is extremely toxic, and that's what's caused all this. Even today, kids in Vietnam are being born with disabilities that are consequence of their grandparents' exposure to 2,4-D. I mean, it just has this sort of epigenetic effect that glyphosate has. It's the gift that keeps on giving, because if your grandmother's exposed, then the grandchild could have a genetic defect as a consequence of that.
And, might I add, for our vets were also sprayed with this, and they have an incredible rate of illness, and they've been ignored and forgotten in terms of their chronic disorders from being sprayed from Agent Orange as well. The other thing about 2,4-D is that it drifts. So crops that are not tolerant to 2,4-D have been dying off. It's been a massive problem on farms that don't have the tolerant crops to 2,4-D. It's been a nightmare overall, and it's not so, because 75% of weeds now in the U.S. are resistant to glyphosate. They develop 2,4-D, but this is not a solution. We keep talking about going back to non-chemical farming. Organic regen can feed the world. So we have to get off the chemical farming wheel, and it can be done. So this is what we're doing. This is not a substitution for glyphosate using 2,4-D.
Yeah, dicamba and glyphosate are two other herbicides that are really nasty, that are also being rolled out now because glyphosate's not working adequately to control the glyphosate-resistant weeds.
Yeah, it says here over 251,000 people, including veterans, were awarded over $180 million from side effects from Agent Orange. So it just makes absolutely no sense to me at all that this is being allowed in our food supply. It sounds like chemical warfare to me, and it just doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, King Arthur's Measure for Measure certified gluten-free flour and Milton sea salt crackers had the highest levels of pesticides. So we really beseech them to do a better job in their sourcing and get those levels down, because some of the pesticides have shown to have harmful effects on offspring and litters. So we want to address and celebrate the top 10 lowest levels of glyphosate. You can still see it on my screen here. Yep. Okay. And that's the Edwards and Sons and Lesser Evil, Live G Free, Made Good, Tinkyada, brown rice pasta, Udi, soft white sandwich bread, Barilla penne pasta, Char's plain New York style bagels, Whole Foods brands, 365 sandwich bread, and Char artisan baker. So I want to point out that Char's was listed on here twice, and Whole Foods is also listed on the levels with the top 10 lowest levels of pesticides. So we've got Char again here on the lowest levels of pesticides, and Whole Foods also in the lowest levels of pesticides. So I want to acknowledge those companies for doing a good job in sourcing, some of the cleaner ingredients. So on the top 10 lowest levels of pesticides, this was Char's artisan white bread, Pacha organic buckwheat bread, Simple Needs quinoa bread, 365 Whole Foods Market sandwich bread, Mountain High organic macaroni, Banza cavatappi pasta, but it should be noted they had the highest levels of glyphosate, and Simple Mills organic almond crackers, Cott's fudge brownie muffin snacks, and Siete cassava flour tortillas, and Live G free cornbread mix. Okay, so this is another one. Live G free was also on the top lowest levels of glyphosate. So Live G free, Char's, and Whole Foods appeared on both of these lists. So we want to do a shout out to them. So tell us, please, why, Dr. Pero, if somebody was eating foods, I guess I should have showed the highest levels too, but let's just go to just go straight to you since we're already doing it. I'll get to the highest levels in a bit. Why would somebody want to go out of their way to avoid glyphosate and, try to seek out the brands that have the lowest levels? What kind of side effects would they see in their children if they had been unknowingly feeding their kids some other brand that had very high levels of glyphosate? What type of side effects?
I won't talk about pathways because we have Dr. Senef here, the pathway queen. I'll talk about the clinical symptoms that parents are going to see in their children and themselves. So we have two kinds of symptoms. You have intestinal symptoms, and then you have extra intestinal symptoms, meaning those symptoms outside the gut. The gut is everything from the mouth to the tush. That's your gut. What kind of things you see intestinally speaking? Kids are bloated. They're not pooping. A third of kids are constipated. No poop, no detox. And a significant number of adults are also constipated because we know, and I know this from Dr. Senef, that glyphosate can cause literally a paralysis of the gut by inhibiting something called myosin fibers. But I'm going to leave pathways to the queen of pathways. What else are we going to see? Something called like IBS, intermittent irritable bowel syndrome, with intermittent diarrhea and constipation. You may see gas, kids who have lots of smelly gas coming out all the time. And parents, you know who those children are. And that's when the room clears out after someone goes to the bathroom. But then remember, there's the gut-brain axis, and I call it the gut-brain microbiome axis, because we are nothing without our bugs. These cause changes neurologically. When I say neurologically, I also mean mental health. So you might see increased levels of anxiety, depression. Those two often go together. Brain fog, cognitive dysfunction, things, and we know autism, glyphosate causes autism, not correlated. We've done this before. There are papers on it. ADHD. So there is the neuropsych issues. And remember what Dr. Stephanie was talking about prior was that when you have this microbiome disruption, the microbiome is your first line of defense. So it hits at your first line of defense. Your second line of defense is your liver. Love your liver. So where does glyphosate inhibit? The cytochrome P450, which is your primary detoxification pathway. So we're consuming these toxins and toxicants in our bodies because of this gut impairment, liver stagnation. And now 1 in 3 adults now has fatty liver, and probably as many kids, by the way.
That's an epidemic. I don't know if people understand how huge it is. It's 1 out of 4 Americans, because that includes children.
1 out of 3 now with fatty liver. And fatty liver is interesting. We used to call it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and we're actually changing it to MAFLD now. Anyway, the nomenclature doesn't matter. The liver gets fatty. And when the liver gets fatty, it doesn't work as well. And your liver is responsible not just for detoxification, it produces all sorts of substances. It's a key organ. So the liver, if it gets too fatty, it can then get fibrotic. And you can get inflammation in the liver, which then leads to literally cirrhosis of the liver. And the main thing that causes that is alcoholism in the past. But now it appears that glyphosate-induced fatty liver is pushing up, in my opinion, what used to be mostly from alcohol. Okay, so glyphosate, I've actually tallied this. I've calculated over 27 things that glyphosate can produce symptom-wise, but those are the main issues: the gut issues, the neurologic symptoms, rashes, joint pain. It's metabolic disruption, metabolic disorders like diabetes. It
But
is
what does that mean? Okay, so
thing.
diabetes, but what does that mean metabolic? Does that mean somebody would be tired? Somebody would like, what does
So
that mean?
they, yeah, so if you have a metabolic disruption, that means your ability to break down carbs and uptake them through the production of insulin from your pancreas gets impaired, and you can become insulin resistant, where it's not working as well. Those are we refer to as metabolic disorders. Those metabolic disorders can lead to other things like cardiovascular disease and autoimmunity, cancer. So it's not a benign condition. You want your pancreas and insulin to be working maximally. And we know there's lots of good data how glyphosate can impair this process. So we have literally an epidemic of diabetes as well in this country, type 2 and type 1
And
diabetes.
glyphosate is a major contributing factor to the diabetes epidemic, is what you're saying. This is extraordinary. I don't think most people know this. I'm pretty sure that hardly anybody at the FDA knows this.
It's hard for me to imagine because they're reading the same papers we're reading. There are hundreds of papers on their stuff. Stephanie and I are like consumed with papers. Not only that, we're seeing so many people who are ill. And we know what's driving the chronic disease epidemic in our country is the assault on our food. Our food has become so toxic. And so many people, and this is the fact that we had to even study gluten, that we're eating gluten-free foods, number one, that's a new phenomenon. It's not more than 25 years old.
Yeah.
This didn't exist before, that we even had to resort to that, and that our gluten-free foods have become toxic because then, as you said, 12% of Americans, it's probably even higher, are going gluten-free.
But 44 out of 46 of them are positive for glyphosate. So they're going gluten-free, but then they're still being exposed to glyphosate, which is exacerbating the situation. It's continuing to cause more of the problem.
And I have to give out a shout out to you, Zen. I was once at an event with you in Sacramento here in California, and you did a beautiful poster of how much glyphosate an average child would be eating if they had Cheerios for breakfast and whole wheat sandwich for lunch, and then that nasty little bit cannavale pasta for dinner. We're talking 4,000 parts per billion per day. And Dr. Huber, Dr. Michael Antonio have reported that 0.1 part per billion of glyphosate caused, not correlated, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. If that's not shocking, I don't know what is.
I don't know what is. And we have an image to show what the levels that we allow in the United States versus what's allowed in Europe. And this is very disturbing because the levels, of course, in the United States are much higher than what is allowed in Europe. Our levels are more than 6 times or nearly 6 times more glyphosate in our food is allowed here in the United States than Europe. And I'm concerned that, even this number might be low considering the numbers that we're finding recently, right? This 8,000 over 2,800 parts per billion of glyphosate in the cavatappi chickpea pasta. Now, the thing about this is that the Banza brand and other brands will say that, well, these 2,800 does not exceed regulatory limits. The FDA allows actually 5,000 parts per billion of glyphosate on chickpeas here in the United States. So they're well within their range of what's allowable on the food supply, and there should be no problem. And actually, Moms Across America is fear mongering and causing, concern and, being misleading and all of that. And we want to address that. And we want to talk about why those levels. I mean, well, Michelle, you just did address it. 0.1 parts per billion has been shown to cause harm. That's a science that's in a sign. There's multiple studies showing that those types of levels, low levels, are harmful. So we're not fear mongering, folks. We're just reporting the facts from the scientists and the doctors that are seeing the patients that have serious side effects from consuming glyphosate on a consistent basis, and even low levels. So we want to make sure to address that. So what else might somebody see? Anything else you want to say about what somebody might see, Michelle, as far as side effects from glyphosate?
Yeah, in children, you also may see growth issues, kids not growing well, failure to thrive,
Mhm.
obesity for sure. 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 children now obese. Obesity is 1 in 3 adults.
And
Perhaps that's
why does it lead to obesity?
I can
um,
answer that. I have a good
please,
story for
Stephanie.
that because it gets back to the butyrate. I've been researching this recently in particular because I've been interested in butyrate for a long time because I think it's a crucial part of the problem that you don't get enough butyrate because of the glyphosate messing up the microbes that produce it. And butyrate actually, it enhances, it causes there are these cells in the gut that respond to butyrate by increasing the production of a hormone called glycogen 1. And that is the hormone that Wegovy pretends to be. So Wegovy is this, great, very big seller drug that everyone's taking to try to lose weight. And it basically acts as if your gut is producing this hormone that it's not producing. It's not producing enough. And the reason why it's not producing enough is because doesn't have enough butyrate. So I think the butyrate is central to the obesity problem. And Nancy Swanson showed in her study, she's got perfect correlation between both obesity and diabetes over time, matching perfectly with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. It is so clear to me that glyphosate is I will say it's the primary cause of the epidemic we're seeing today in America in both obesity and diabetes. And I think this butyrate is a very clear explanation for why that would be. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the gases, because you have all this bloating that's going on in the kids and of course adults too. The bloating is a consequence of gases that are being produced by the microbes. Normally the microbes know how to take that gas back into organic matter and actually reduce carbon dioxide using hydrogen as a reducing agent. And that's part of that whole process that starts with the starch and the fiber and the milk, illegal saccharides. I got to get that word right. All those complex starchy, sugar compounds are being digested by the bifidos, but the bifidos are being killed off. And so what often happens is these kids eat this, highly processed foods, very little fiber. They're not providing the nutrients that they don't have the bifidobacteria to break them down. So they don't want to eat those fiber things. And therefore they get this enormous deficiency in that whole supply chain that produces a butyrate. And on top of that, they get the bloating of the hydrogen gas because normally that would disappear to make the butyrate. And as a consequence, and those enzymes are being disrupted by glyphosate, the dehydrogenases that bring that hydrogen gas back in are being suppressed by glyphosate. That's been shown in soil bacteria studies and in E. coli studies. Lots of dehydrogenases are suppressed by glyphosate. You need those to bring that hydrogen gas back into organic matter to make that butyrate. And that process is getting broken down. And as a result of that, the hydrogen gas gets used to make hydrogen sulfide. And now you have the stinky odor that we talked about with the hydrogen sulfide gas, which also is it can just float right up to the brain and cause brain fog. So you get the whole story of the brain fog, the bloating, the constipation, all of that is coming about because of this whole system where it starts with glyphosate messing up the gut microbes.
That's causing miserable existences in people across the country and around the world. And so this is why we did the testing, and we want to show you the top 5 most contaminated with glyphosate. These brands were Banza Cavatappi pasta, Bob's Red Mill all-purpose flour. This is very, very sad to us. We love their company and their ethics and their products. So this was super sad. And the Flax for Life chocolate brownies are delicious. So also very depressing that they were in the top 5 most contaminated with glyphosate. Pamela's Figgies and Jammies, Mission Fig cookies, probably my favorite cookies. So sad. Kids Kind chewy chocolate chip bars, also in the top 5 with glyphosate. The top 5 most contaminated with pesticides were King Arthur's Measure for Measure certified gluten-free flour, Milton sea salt crackers. These are all gluten-free, by the way. It doesn't say it here, but they were gluten-free. And Simple Mills brownie mix, that's gluten-free brownie mix, Pamela's gluten-free flour mix, and Go Macro Berry granola bar. Do want to say that we sent out letters to folks. We don't have it listed here, but we were sad to see that Mary's Gone Crackers did have, and they were organic, they did have glyphosate in them. And we sent out letters. And that day we heard from Mary's Gone Crackers saying that they have switched suppliers. They are working with new suppliers that are regenerative and local.
Nice.
And that they hope they will continue testing and that their goal is to get to non-detectable. And they said, we are committed to, Mary's Gone Crackers, to you and to Mary's Gone Crackers consumers. customers to get this right, and we will. So
Nice.
it was
That's
very,
very nice.
I
very-
love those crackers. Yeah.
yeah. So we are very happy about that. And when they can report back to us that they're non-detectable, of course, we will celebrate them, as we will with any other brand who is happy to share with us, third-party independent test results of their products. We're also happy to, have a focus group and consult with these brands. Like what do moms really want? What do we want to see in the food supply? And so let us know and reach out to us if you want to do that. So these high levels of glyphosate and pesticides in gluten-free foods, very concerning. There's an actress named Jennifer Esposito that wrote a book about her gluten intolerance, and so we just wanted to give her a shout out. I believe we have an image of her book to show. That is on Amazon. It's called Jennifer's Way: Journey to something disease and what doctors can do about it. Maybe we don't have that image. Okay, we don't have it. All right. Anyway, you can check that out. Jennifer Esposito's book. We do have some comparison photos. If you're wondering, well, are the levels of glyphosate and pesticides higher in gluten-free foods than non-gluten-free foods? We do have some images to show for that, if you could bring those up. And we have the Detox Project one. This is just what was found in grocery stores of regular, foods, conventional foods that do have gluten in them. The levels were between 20 or 12. I see 12 parts per billion up to over 1,150 parts per billion of glyphosate. So in comparison, the gluten-free food levels were lower, except for the outlier of the cavatappi chickpea pasta, which was 2,876. So this is what has been found already in grocery store foods: 37 conventional foods, 26 non-GMO foods, and 23 organic foods. We're very sad to show, that about 20% of the organic foods still did have some level of glyphosate. But as you can see, the levels were lower, 13 to 54 instead of, 12 to or 20 to over 1,100 parts per billion. So you're always better in purchasing organic. And gluten-free mostly did have lower levels. We have another image to show some cereals that were tested previously by the Detox Project. If we could bring that up. No, this is we can still talk about that image. This is 7,800 food samples that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency tested. We want to give a shout out to Tony Mitra, who pretty much harassed the Canadian government to do this. And what they found in the 7,800 samples tested was that they tested food from over 60 countries, and the bulk of the foods were produced in Canada and the US, and some were also from China and Mexico, also India. But what they found was that Mexico and China had 40 to 70% lower levels of glyphosate in their food. That North America definitely had the highest levels, and the United States had the highest levels. And in some foods, like I believe it was the chickpeas and the oats, 100% of those food samples were positive for glyphosate of the samples that were tested. So we have a serious glyphosate problem. Here's the image that shows glyphosate food testing results in parts per billion in in cereals. And so these were just, non-gluten-free cereals. One is gluten-free, actually, the Annie's gluten-free bunny and cookies. But you can see that that's not the highest level. Still was there, though, 55 parts per billion. And then Cheerios had the highest level at over 1,100 parts per billion of glyphosate and AMPA. So we have a serious glyphosate problem in America. I don't know how many times we're going to have to say glyphosate before we actually get this off of our crops and out of our food supply. But let's talk about first. Let's talk about wheat, which let's make sure we're clear that it's not GMO. Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit more about what crops are sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent?
Yes,
Yeah.
sure. Wheat is certainly one of them, and I didn't even realize that back when I was seeing celiac disease, gluten intolerance, gluten-free foods. I was puzzled because I knew wheat wasn't GMO, and I didn't understand why at that time until I looked into it, and then I realized that it's being sprayed right before harvest. I was really shocked to find that out, and it's not the only food. In fact, sugarcane is another one. All the sugars are bad because you've got the GMO Roundup Ready corn that makes the corn syrup. and the high fructose corn syrup, and then you have the GMO beets, sugar beets that make the beet sugar, and then you've got the sugar cane, which is not GMO, but it's sprayed right before harvest. So you've got glyphosate in all the sugars, and then you have the garbanzo beans and the chickpeas. That was the thing that really shocked me with the study on the poison foods of North America, because those came out on top. I mean, many of those samples had extremely high levels of glyphosate in them. And they, of course, are also being sprayed right before harvest, just like the wheat, just like the oats. And that's why you've got the Cheerios. Cheerios are such a great food for kids, as they can pick them up from their tray. They love Cheerios, and they're poisoning them. And that is really sad to me. So the oats, the wheat, the barley, all the beers are testing positive for glyphosate. And I know Zen did a study on wines, and they're all positive for glyphosate as well. So you need to go organic if you're going to drink beer and wine.
Absolutely. Orange juice as well. And about the chickpeas, what's really disturbing to me is that there's a huge movement right now for regenerative organic agriculture, but a lot of people are just saying regenerative, and they're moving, there's funding for regenerative agriculture. They're not including the word organic. And that's because a lot of the cover crops that are being used in regenerative agriculture, which is a great initiative, it's to restore the organic matter in the soil, sequester more carbon, retain more water, improve the organic matter in the soil. Well, they're saying they're doing regenerative farming, and they're planting cover crops, which are chickpeas. And then they spray the chickpeas, this cover crop, with glyphosate as a drying agent, and sell those chickpeas in products that then say we're regenerative.
Oh my, that's so awful. That's an awful story.
And yet they most likely have high levels of glyphosate on them. Now, we have to make sure, very clear, that companies that are, promoting regenerative farming are either not allowing glyphosate to be sprayed as a drying agent and any other agrochemical, because they could be using 2,4-D or dicamba or Parquat or something. But that we really move in the direction towards regenerative organic agriculture and retain that, really sacred aspect of not farming with chemicals that are going to destroy the earthworms and the soil microbes and decrease nutrient density of the crop. So I just wanted to say that's something I'm very concerned about, is the word regenerative being on the front page of Monsanto's website, and the government giving $300 million towards regenerative farming, and the possibility of that still including the use of glyphosate as a drying agent on the cover crops. Slightly concerning.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yes. So, okay. So we covered why they do it. Did you just mention that, the drying agent, Stephanie?
Oh yeah. I mean, because it synchronizes the going to seed, because it causes them to go to seed. And of course, the glyphosate goes into the seed. So actually the wheat germ has the highest levels of glyphosate compared to the other parts of the wheat, which is probably the healthiest part of the wheat, is the wheat germ, with lots of nutrition. But then it's going to be loaded with glyphosate. So it makes them go to seed, so you can synchronize, because you can have some that are slower than others. And also it can beat the frost. In Canada, often they're facing a winter coming, and they don't want to lose the crop if the weather turns cold. And so they can actually get the harvest to happen a little bit earlier, control the timing of it.
We want farmers to be able to farm, with the best tools and, methods that are possible. However, we don't want to be poisoned in the process, and we don't want them to be poisoned either. We don't want them to destroy their soil and to not be able to have a legacy of agriculture to be able to pass down to their family members. So let's keep in mind, everybody, that the glyphosate's only been used as a drying agent since the late 2000s. So, less than 20 years now. And so that's not something that absolutely has to happen. Farmers have been farming for thousands of generations without glyphosate as a drying agent, without GMOs, and we have faith that they can continue to farm in a way that's healthy and safe. So, Michelle, can we go through what can we do to fix this? You have a book coming out soon called Making Our Children Well. Can you give us some hope or some steps?
Yeah.
What we can do?
Absolutely. There are definitely things that we can do, but I want to mention one last point, because this is so relevant, because mold toxicity is a huge problem in people now, and children, and that didn't exist prior, where people are incredibly sick. And glyphosate, we know, is an antibiotic patented by Monsanto in 2003 and 2010. When it kills off those beneficial microbes that Stephanie was talking about, the lactobacilli and the bifidobacteria, you then have a change in the homeostasis in our guts and the soil. And you have an overgrowth of microbes that are pathogenic fungi, mold toxins, and they're in our food like aspergillus, and they're in our guts. And this is a new problem, and it has to do with this imbalance and glyphosate literally killing off all these beneficial microbes, which we've known at least since 2013 when the initial chicken papers came out of Germany. So
I want to interrupt you because aspergillus is one of the very few microbes that can completely metabolize glyphosate and get rid of it. I suspect that aspergillus is actually doing a favor when it becomes a problem by clearing the glyphosate. At the same time, it's producing toxic, elements that are causing disease.
It consumes glyphosate, aspergillus does, you're saying?
It does. It breaks it down. It actually does such a good job that they're thinking of using it as a way to break down glyphosate in the soil.
But it's also toxic.
It's also, it produces these toxic metabolites. That's the thing. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is another one. That's a huge problem in the hospitals these days. And that one can also break down glyphosate. There's only a few that can do it because glyphosate has this really tough carbon phosphorus bond that most organisms are stumped by that bond. But there are a few microbes. Acetobacter, I should make a shout out for Acetobacter because they can also, some of the species.
Acetobacter breaks down glyphosate. That's in kombucha.
Exactly. So I like to eat sauerkraut and apple cider vinegar for that reason.
Yeah. I do need to mention Michelle, before you go on with what else we can do about it, I do need to mention, I forgot to talk about the fact that we also found gluten in the gluten-free products. And this is very important. People need a heads up. 4 out of 46 samples, Simple Mills brownie mix, Made Good soft baked chocolate cookies, Trader Joe's almost everything bagel had 269 parts per million of glyphosate. Simple Mills almond flour crackers had 59 parts per million. So these 4 literally should be, pulled from the market according to the FDA's laws that they can't have more than 20 parts per million. But also the gluten-free certification organization states that gluten-free food should have less than 10 parts per million. And 3 additional samples had above 10 parts per million. Jovial spaghetti, Go Macro Berry granola bar, and Char pretzels had above 10 parts per million. So if you have a loved one with celiac, please screenshot this and let them know about this. This is something that could really make a huge difference for their lives. Okay, so let's go back to Michelle. We only have 2 minutes left to.
You know what? Maybe we'll spill over 3 minutes because I think people would want solutions, and we are solutionaries. We don't want to leave people depressed at the shopping cart. No, you don't need a PhD to eat. Number one, you got to go organic regen. You must, and if you don't, this is what we're dealing with. So it's a transition. We don't ask for perfection, but make the journey to switch. If you come off processed foods and stick to whole foods, it's less likely you're going to get these contaminants. So please stick to whole foods. When we say whole foods, what do we mean by that? Not the Whole Foods Market. We're talking about eating the whole food, beans, fruits, veggies, meats, if you eat meat, and staying away from ultra processed foods where you need a PhD to figure out the ingredient list because there's so many ingredients, like what we're feeding our kids in public school. Thank you for that, Zen. So not that, whole foods. And then if you need assistance to heal your leaky gut, there's some testing that you can do. Why doctors don't do this testing, I don't know, but you can test for food intolerances for gluten, dairy, soy. Those tests can run about $139. You can test for zonulin. You can test it in your poop. And here are some tests that you can do. People can order that first zonulin test that costs about $177. And you can see if you have zonulin. You shouldn't have zonulin in your poop. Or you can do something like a GI map test, which a provider needs to order for you. It's a little bit expensive, but it shows you the microbes and zonulin. And you shouldn't have that protein in there, which is what is signaling and helping your intestine keep out foreign invaders, let certain things through that need to come through, and preventing incomplete proteins from passing through, like gluten and dairy and other toxicants as well. So test for sure. You're eating whole foods. Like you say, okay, I've got leaky gut. If you change your diet, you go whole foods, you can start including fermented foods in your diet. Apple cider vinegar, kombucha, kefir, You can get coconut kefirs if you're dairy sensitive until you re-regulate it. You can jazz up your own yogurts. When you make your own yogurts with probiotics and your own fat dairy using a yogurt maker, they cost anywhere from $30 on. You get more microbes in there to replace that bifido that was lost, the lactobacillus that was lost. Our kids are bereft of enough organisms to do the job. Those microbes just don't detoxify you. They also make vitamins, all the B vitamins. And then when you found the school lunch study, there were no B vitamins in our kids' food. They need those B vitamins to run their brains. So what we want to do is inoculate our microbes in the gut in the right place, not in the small intestine. And that gives you SIBO and SIFO. We want it in the large intestine. If you don't eat fermented foods, you need to take probiotics. So there are homeopathics to help heal leaky gut. There are herbal formulas. There are nutraceuticals. And I'd recommend you work with a holistic practitioner if you can't do it yourself, naturopath, homeopath, chiropractors, practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine. There are many ways to skin this cat. Please don't skin the cat. I love cats. But there are many ways that you can heal. And my cat's coming right here. She must have heard me talking about her sweetness. So there are ways you can do this. And I'd recommend the best thing you can do is, here she comes. Okay. She got the signal, is to heal that leaky gut. The two things you have to focus on in yourself and your children are healing leaky gut and resolving dysbiosis, which is that abnormal microbiome, which we all have because we're all eating glyphosate, even in the organics, as you can see, because even the USDA said 5 to 9% of our foods are contaminated with glyphosate that are because of the water. It's probably a lot higher than that. Cross-contamination is probably higher. So, it's really hard for these companies to keep their food glyphosate free, but we have to work on it, especially if we passed a farm bill that actually helped consumers and not the producers and not corporations, if we actually protected farmers and the eaters. And this is what we've been working on. And a shout out to Moms Across America and lobbyists and others who have been going to DC, speaking with senators, FDA, USDA. Gosh, I know you've gone a lot. I've gone just a little bit. We're going to drag Stephanie along with us next time to where change has to happen. It has to happen legislatively, and support organizations like Moms Across America, like Stephanie's work, like my work, so we can continue to do this. Because, people say, Moms Across America is causing fear mongering. I'm saying, are you kidding? Give her a Nobel Peace Prize for revealing what it is, what we've done to our children. Have no fear. This can be reversed, and all these symptoms will go away. And I've seen it clear up from as early as 3 days till about 4 weeks. It takes about 4 weeks to kind of calm down the immune system and drive down all those antibodies that have been elevated from leaky gut. So some people are saying, which foods should we eat? Please go to Moms Across America, read the paper, and contact us if you don't find what you're looking for. Please contact your elected officials. Thank you. We have a petition going up on Moms Across America. Isn't that right, Zen?
Yes, I'm sorry it's not up right now, but please do sign up for momsacrossamerica.org under Connect and get our newsletter, and we will get that out to you. Also, please find and contact your elected officials. Let them know we need a safe, non-toxic, nutrient-dense food supply. Send them the links from Moms Across America. We have a whole under data. You can find data on toxins and all of our testing. You can find our school lunch testing, our fast food testing, our baby formula testing in conjunction with gmoscience.org, and gluten-free testing, cereal testing, and pretty soon we will have more testing out, more towards the fall, most likely. So please do contact your elected officials, because the FDA is now saying that they would add baby formula to the Baby Food Safety Act, which is what we asked them to do when we went to DC. But they're waiting on our congressmen and senators and elected officials to give them the mandate, to give them approval. So we need to talk to them and tell them, you need to give the FDA the ability to do their jobs and to make that happen. So please do contact your senators and representatives and let them know what you want. Regulation for heavy metals, no glyphosate spraying as a drying agent. We don't want glyphosate at all in our food supply. We don't want GMOs in our food supply, right? We want a safe, non-toxic, nutrient-dense food supply that supports regenerative or organic agriculture, okay? And if you have any questions, go to momsacrossamerica.org. Please see and share the new MDs on Rumble, on Facebook. Sometimes it's on YouTube. It's always on X, on Twitter. and we appreciate your support. It will be up on Instagram eventually here. So
We're
please,
trying. That's next step. It's coming.
We're working on
go
it.
to gmoscience.org and support Dr. Perro and her team's great work, and check out Stephanie Senup's book, and also go to momsacrossamerica.org. Thank you very much, ladies, for your expertise, your wisdom, and for Michelle, your encouragement on how we can eat more, whole foods and go in the direction of having a safe, non-toxic, nutrient-dense food supply. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the New
Bye-bye.
MDs. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
next month.